Seches Bava Metzia Daf Tes contains one Mishnah near the end of the Daf, our first Mishnah after the beginning of the Masechta. We'll have two primary sugyas before the Mishnah. First is the Gemara's continuation of its search for a proof as to whether sitting on an animal is kainah. The second will be if having kalim placed on an animal and you're kainah the animal, could you then be kainah the kalim, or if you do mashiach on the animal without being kainah, could you then be kainah the kalim that are on them? And then we'll get to our Mishnah, which introduces a new topic. What happens if somebody picks up an object for his friend to be kainah for him, and then he decides he wanted to be kainah himself, or he announces he wanted to be kainah himself, is he kainah or not? So let's begin with the last two lines on Daf Ches Amud Beis. The Gemara has been discussing is roichev kainah. Roichev generally means riding an animal. The Gemara is asking about where you're just sitting on the animal. If you're actually steering the animal with your legs or driving it, that is for sure kainah, because you're making it move as a mashicha. The question is just sitting on it and holding it. So you're kind of gripping the animal. Is that considered to be kainah or not? So the Gemara is going to bring a number of proofs to this. Whereas first, proof is from a brayso that says as follows: a machlokes comparing the meshicha, which is pulling a camel, and leading manhig of a donkey. Now the Gemara will explain soon that the normal way to be kainah, the normal way to steer a camel is to pull it, while the normal way to steer a donkey is to lead it. So the Tanakama here, the Chachamim says, if you have two people that are pulling a camel, or two people that are leading a donkey, or one of them is pulling and one of them is leading, in this way, one is a kainah. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, that last case you're not kainah. You're only kainah if you do it in the normal way, which is pulling the donkey and leading, which is pulling the camel and leading the donkey. Now, says the Gemara, let's look at this carefully. The Gemara is first going to try to bring it right from the first line, and then we'll try to bring it right from the second line. So first of all, we said in the brayso that the Rabbanan hold, if one person was leading it and one person was pulling it, then you are a kainah. That implies only leading and pulling are kainah, but sitting on the donkey, roichev, is not kainah. So that should be a raya, roichev is not kainah. The Gemara says, no, really, I'll tell you that the Chachamim hold that roichev is also kainah. Why did they mention roichev here? Why did they only say pulling and leading? The says because they came to argue on Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you can only pull a camel. You can only lead the donkey, and not vice versa. Chachamim here are saying, no, pulling or leading. That's what they come to tell you. If you have two people, one pulling and one leading a camel or a donkey, it works. So Gemara says if that's true, that they're saying that pulling and leading work in both a camel and a donkey, so then just say one case. Say pulling and leading work in a camel or a donkey, and you include all four halachas in one: pulling a camel, leading a camel, pulling a donkey, leading a donkey. Why do we split it up like this? So Gemara answers, there were one of the four circumstances doesn't work. Obviously, pulling the camel and leading the donkey works. Pulling the donkey and leading the camel, one of those two doesn't work. And there's a difference of opinion as to which one. According to Chachamim, according to one, it is leading the donkey. According to one, it's pulling the camel. That doesn't work. Now, says the Gemara, okay, let's begin right from the second line. The second line said, "B'midazu kainah." In this way, you're kainah. That line seems to exclude something else is not kainah. What are we excluding? Probably roichev. The roichev is not kainah. No, that's not what we're excluding. We're excluding switching it around. We're excluding pulling the donkey or leading the camel. Gemara says, well, and then that's exactly Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who said that you can only pull the camel and lead the donkey, and not vice versa. So that's different. Rabbi Yehuda. So Gemara says it's different. Because this, like we said before, this opinion holds that one of the two works. Rabbi Yehuda holds neither of them work. And there's a difference of opinion as to which is the one that works and which is the one that does not work, pulling the donkey or leading the camel. Okay, now we bring our next raya. So the next raya comes from another brayso, which we quote, which says if you have two people and there is a donkey that has a lead rope. He's wearing a halter and he has a lead rope, so it's kind of like a rope that's wrapped around his head, and then there's a line that comes from it. So one person is riding the donkey and one person is holding the rope. So what's the psak? They both are apparently trying to be kainah from hefker. They found it. So the psak, the brayso says, is the person who's riding on the donkey is kainah the donkey and not the rope. The person who's holding the rope is kainah the rope and not the donkey. Each one gets what he's holding. So you see that by riding the donkey, he's kainah the donkey. So you see that rochav, riding, is a kinyan. The Gemara says, no, this is not the case of our Shaila. This is talking about where he was pushing it, he was leading it, he was driving it with his legs. So the Gemara says, if that's true, then he's really kainah the donkey with a real, regular kinyan. So the rope is part of the attire of the donkey. It's part of the things that go along with the donkey. So you should be kainah the entire rope too. Why is the other person kainah the rope? This one did a real kinyan by riding the donkey and driving it with his legs. So the Gemara is going to try a few answers here and reject them all until we get to the end, and then have a second one. So Gemara says, first answers will tell you you're right. They're both kind of the rope. He's kind of the rope because he's kind of the donkey, and the donkey's wearing the rope, and the other person is kind of the rope because he's holding one end. So therefore, they're both kind of half, just like our case of Shnei Melechs and Batalas. Here you have Shnei Melechs and Barope, and they're both kind of half this rope, which the Gemara calls a Meisira. So Gemara says, why should that be? We said that that in order to be kind of something from Hefker, you have to pick up the entire thing. So the person who's riding the donkey, okay, he's picking up the entire thing. He's holding on to the donkey, which is considered to be a kinyan in the rope. The other person picks up the other end of the rope. He picks it up for him, like we said in the Mishnah, and therefore the one who's riding the donkey could be kind of the rope. However, the one who's who's holding just the rope, what's picking up the other end for him? It's attached to the head of the donkey. The donkey can't have das to pick it up for him. There is no kinyan, there is no hagbah on that rope at all. So therefore, he is only holding part of it up, and the rest of it is lying on the floor or lying somewhere which is not a place of kinyan for him, should not be kind of anything. So the Gemara therefore says, okay, we'll revise the pshat, and he's only really kind of what he has in his fist, the part of the rope which is actually in his hand. That, as we said before, is considered to be cut off from the rest, and that's a kinyan that he's kind of there. However, the rest of the rope all belongs to the person who's riding the donkey, because this person didn't do a real hagbah on anything. He only did a hagbah on the actual part which is in his fist, and is considered to be cut off. So Gemara says, hold on a second, this doesn't make sense either, because how then is he doing a kinyan on the rest of the rope that the person who's riding the donkey should be kind of the rest of the rope? He's not doing a kinyan for him. The only reason that he's doing a kinyan for him in our first Mishnah is because he wants to be kind of himself, and he knows the only way this kinyan works is if we each pick up our half for myself and for the other. But here he's not being kind of anything by picking it up. He's only being kind of what he has in his fist. For that he doesn't need to pick it up, and then for that he doesn't need help, and he doesn't need anyone to pick up anything for him. So this whole kinyan of me for you and you for me doesn't help him at all, so he's not doing it. And it doesn't help him, and he's not going to do it. And the person who's riding the donkey can't do it. So for him, it's lying on the ground. And the other end is lying on the ground, so it can't be kind of with that at all. So still, the halacha that we said doesn't really make sense. It doesn't add up. So the Gemara therefore says, and Rav Ashi says, okay, here's what happens. The one who's riding the donkey is kind of the donkey, and the part of the rope that's wrapped around his head, the halter. And the one who's holding the rope is only kind of what's in his fist. Everything else in between, there is no kinyan, because you didn't do anything on that. It's not considered broken off. It's not considered cut off, and you weren't kind of, you didn't lift it up fully. And therefore, there's no kinyan on the rest of it, and Rashi says it's hefker. Now, that's the Gemara's first answer. The Gemara sticks with that, and then the Gemara quotes Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo says, no. Really, we'll go back to our first explanation, that the one who's holding the rope is kind of the entire rope. It does not go it does not belong to the one who's riding the donkey at all. And the reason is because the one who's holding the rope could pull it off. He could yank it, and the entire thing will come to him. And we have a halacha, says Rabbi Avo, that anytime you could pull something and it all comes to you, it's considered like you did hagbah, like you lifted it, and it comes to you, it belongs to you. Now, says the Gemara, this halacha of Rabbi Avo is a mistake, and it's clearly disproven from the following scenario. What would you say if there was a talus that's lying partially on the ground and partially on a box or some sort of table or something? The Gemara calls it an amud, a pillar. Now, one person comes and he picks up the part of the talus which is lying on the ground. Someone else afterwards comes and picks up the part of the talus which is lying on the table. Now, according to Rabbi Avo, the first person, by picking up one end, even though he didn't pick up the entire thing because the rest of it is lying on the table, since he could pull it to himself, he's kind of completely. And the one who picks it up from the table afterwards makes no kinyan at all. The Gemara says that can't be. The Gemara doesn't explain why. The Rishayim don't explain why. But the Gemara therefore says, since that it can't be, this halacha of Rabbi Avo must be a mistake. Okay, we'll continue with our next raya as to whether sitting or riding on an animal is kainit. So Gemara quotes Rabbi Elazar, says in a brisa, somebody's riding an animal in the field, or he's leading an animal inside the city, that's a kinyan. So you see clearly riding an animal in the field counts, that works as a kinyan. So Gemara says again, that's not a raya. This is talking about where he's steering and pushing the animal with his knees. We never had a shayla about that. So Gemara says, no, we can't be talking about that case. because then why would I have to speak about leading it in the city as well as riding it in the field? Riding is just a type of leading it. Either way, he's driving it, he's leading it with his legs. So they're both leading. Why would we have to mention each one separately? So that, the Gemara says, no, two types of leading, and they have different halachas. One works in the field, one works in the city. So what's takab shad in that? Why should one work in the field and one work in the city? So here we're going to have a bit of discussion. So the Gemara first says, Rav Kahana says, because it's not the normal way for people to ride in the cities. The city's crowded. There's no room for people to ride animals. It's normal to lead it. And in the fields, it's normal for people to ride. And therefore, it's not a kinyan if you do something abnormal. Says Gemara, why should that be? Rav Ashi said to Rav Kahana, you mean if you do a kinyan, which is not the normal way people do things in that time and place, it's no good? Let's say somebody does a kinyan hagbah on a wallet on Shabbos. Now it's muktzah, so most people aren't going to do it, so it's not normal. So now it becomes not chal the kinyan. That can't be. He shouldn't have done what he did, but what he did is still kinyan chal. So here also, if you ride it in the city, it's unusual. However, the kinyan is still going to work. It doesn't make sense to say that it should not work. So therefore, the Gemara says, okay, we have to adjust the pshat here slightly. We're talking about where it wasn't that he was making a kinyan on it from Hefker. Somebody sold him the animal, and he said, I'm selling it to you on condition that you're kinyan it in a normal way, a way that people normally make kinyan, and a way that people normally use it. So now it makes a difference, because if he does something abnormal, the kinyan is not going to work. Now, the Gemara says, here are the situations in which it's not going to work. So you're not supposed to ride the donkey inside the city. People don't do that. There are exceptions, though. In Rosh Hashanah, which is a very wide area, there you're allowed to. If it is an Adam Chashav that it's not appropriate for him to lead a donkey, then he can. A woman also can. Rashi says she's not strong enough to lead it. If he's a very low-class individual, then also he doesn't care to do something which is inappropriate, so he can lead it as well. So these are all situations in which it will work, and it'll be chal. Okay. This really concludes the Gemara's discussion of Roichev. The Gemara now moves to our second sugya, which is related. The Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar asked the Shaila, what happens if somebody says to his friend, pull this animal towards you in order to be kaina the kalim that are on it? Now, the Gemara has an adjustment here with the word. The Gemara first says that he says liknois. Liknois means to buy what's on it. The Gemara says, what do you mean? You can't say liknois. You have to say kini. The Gemara says, okay, he said kini. So now we just have the shaila. He's pulling the animal, and that is moving towards him. The kalim that are on it is at a kinyan on the kalim, and again, he's not being kind of the animal. So says the Gemara, why don't you ask, even if he is kind of the animal, who says that that will work? If he's saying be kind of the animal and kalim that are on it, sounds like it's pasha to you that that should work, but Rava says that that shouldn't work. Because the only way that would work would be because the animal now belongs to you, and the animal serves as your property to be kind of what's in it, as a kinyan chatzar. The problem is it's a chatzar malachas, it's a moving chatzar. Halacha is a moving chatzar, does not work. Now, maybe you'll tell me the cases where it stopped, and the kinyan on the kalim should be after it stopped. At first you pulled it and you were kind of the animal, then it stopped and you're kind of the kalim in it. It's not true, because moving chatzar is no good for kinyan, even if it stopped. If it has the capability to move, it's no good, even if it's not actually moving at this moment. So the Gemara says it's talking about where it was tied up. So you pulled the animal, became yours, then it was tied up, now it can't move, and therefore it's kind of kinyan chatzar. Now the Gemara has some kashas on this concept of a moving chatzar not being able to be kind. The Gemara says that Rav Papa and Rav Huda Breder Rav Yeshua said to Rava, let's say somebody's traveling in a ship and fish jump out of the water into the boat. You can say he's not kind because the boat is moving. So the Gemara says, no, there the boat is not moving. The boat is not generating motion of its own. The boat is in the water, and the water pushes the boat. So it's the water that's moving it. But it itself, if there's no self-generating motion, it's not called chatzar mahalachas. Where it says, okay, so Ravina said to Rav Ashi, so what if somebody's walking in Rosh Hashanah? There's a woman walking in Rosh Hashanah, and her husband wants to give her the get, so he throws it either into her lap or to the basket that she's holding on her head. So it's not going to be good. So the Gemara says, no, again, the basket, wherever she's throwing it, that's not moving. It's not self-generating emotion. She is carrying the basket along. That's the situation, and therefore it's not considered to be chatzar mahalachas. Okay, next Gemara. Now we begin our Next Mishnah, second Mishnah of the Masechta. So Mishnah discusses the following scenario. One person's riding on an animal. Reuven's riding on an animal, and he sees an object. He finds by sight a valuable object. And he says to his friend who's not riding an animal, who can reach it, he says, do me a favor, give it to me. So, pick it up and give it to me. The guy picks it up, and now we have two scenarios. Scenario one, he picks it up and he says, I'm zeicha for myself, not for you. So the halacha is that he's taka zeicha for himself. We don't assume that he was a zeicha for the other one, then he changed his mind. Second scenario is that he gives it to him, and after he gave it to him, he says, I was zeicha in it myself. Before I gave it to you, I had in mind that it should belong to me. So that, we don't believe him, or it's not effective what he says, and it doesn't go to him, it goes to the person who's riding the animal. Okay, now the Gemara is going to go to a different case. We'll quote a Mishnah, we'll have a machlokes. Gemara is going to try to bring a raya from our sugya, and that'll conclude the daf for us. So the Mishnah is discussing someone who's collecting peya. So peya is food, produce left off in the corner of a field for the poor people. Only poor people are allowed to be kained. Here somebody comes in, he does a kinyan on it on behalf of another poor individual. He says, I'm kained this for a poor person. So the Mishnah doesn't specify whether the person who's making the kinyan was poor or not. It just discusses the halacha, whether it works for that poor person or not. Rabbi Eliezer says it works and has to be given to that poor individual that he was kained for. Chachamim say it does not work. It's hafker. It goes to the first ani that you could find. Now, who was making the kinyan and what is behind this machlokes? So Ula says, name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. The whole machlokes is talking about where the kaina was rich. He himself has no rights to take this payah at all. And he's trying to be makneh to a poor person who does have rights to take it, but he's not here. Let's machlokes over. Rabbi Eliezer holds he could be poor if he wants. He could be mafker all his property, make himself poor, then he'll have the right to take it, and then he could be mazaket to someone else. And therefore, since he potentially could create the state, we give him the rights as if he was in the state already. We don't make him create that state. And therefore, since he could be zeichin it himself, with that theoretical idea, he could therefore be zeichin it for someone else as well. That is Rabbi Elazar's shita, and that's why the kinyan for the other poor person works. Rabbanan hold, no. We say, since he could be kained for himself, he's kained for someone else. But we don't say, since he could make himself poor, and then he could be kained for himself, and then since he could make himself, and then since he could be kained for someone else, he is kind of, the Gemara calls this one migu we say, two migus we don't say. We say two steps of he could have. He could have been zeichen for himself, therefore he could be zeichen for someone else. That he could have made himself poor, and he could have then been zeichen himself, that we don't say. Therefore the person has to be poor now, not potentially poor by being mafker all his things. So what comes out in the case of a poor person who's picking it up for another poor person? So according to Ula's Pshat, both Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan would agree that kinyan works because there's only one migu there. It says Rav Nachman, he argues on Ula, and he says no, that case should be a machlokes as well. And where do you see that? Look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said that that you have one person riding the animal, and he tells someone else, pick up the Metzia for me and give it to me, and he says, I was zeicha in it first. So we said that he is zeicha in it on his own. That means that it was not chal, the kinyan for the other person. Now, this is talking about a found object. Found object, there's no difference between a rich and poor person. Everyone has the same status relative to a found object as a poor person has to the peah. Now, why is the kinyan not chal to the individual he picked it up for? Both the Rabbanan and Rabbi Eliezer agree that in the case of a poor person for a poor person, he picks it up, the kinyan is chal. We say since he could be zeicha for himself, he's zeicha for someone else. Obviously, this must be the case where there is a machlokes, and therefore it is the Rabbanan. So let's say that, therefore, this proves that there's a machlokes in the case of an ani picking up the payah for another ani as well. So the Gemara answers no. The guy who found it, his claim is not that I want it now. I was first picked it up for you and I want it now. And the Mishnah is poskening that his hagbah didn't work for him. The case is where he picked it up and he said, I wanted it originally. I never had in mind to be mezaket to you. I wanted to take it for myself the entire time. Tchila. He said, I was zeichen it first. Says Gemara, I'll prove it to you. Because in the Seifa, it says Tchila. So it says that after he gave it to the guy, he says, I picked it up for myself first. Obviously, it's first. He's not saying I'm kind it now. He already gave it to the other guy. So what's it say tchila there? Must say tchila there is to show that the Reisha and the Seifa are both talking about a case where he said he picked it up first. Originally, his intent was to pick it up for himself. Now, so what is Rav Nachman say to that? Says where I know exactly the opposite. By saying tchila in the Seifa, it shows that the beginning, the Reisha, was not a case of tchila. The Reisha was where he did not say he wants to pick it up for himself first. That's why we have to emphasize it in the Seifa. And therefore, the Reisha is talking about where he's claiming that the original kinyan I did for him didn't work. And the only one who holds that way would be the Rabbanon if there is a machlekes in the case of ani and ani.